The study was conducted by the Policy Exchange think tank, and joining us now is the Head of Crime and Justice and a former Detective Chief Inspector in the Met, David Spencer. David, morning to you. You've talked to a lot of people in this survey, 2,000 people. Pretty overwhelming that people do not want the police staring at screens all day looking for hate crime. They want burglary, knife crime, antisocial behaviour. That's what they want done.
It is overwhelming, and it's absolutely unequivocal as to what the polling and what the public showed us. And that's very, very clear that the public want a tougher approach to crime than is being taken at the moment. And that's across every single group. So whether you look at men or women, younger people, older people, people who are richer or poorer, every single group say they want to see a tougher approach to crime by the police.
What is interesting, actually, when you say about the all demographics, it's the women particularly, that women want tougher policing than men, actually. And that must be surely because so many of us are mothers and worry about our kids walking out the front door.
Yeah, there's a marginal, it's marginally bigger for women than it is for men, but you're right. And what we see is that in terms of what that means in terms of a tougher approach to crime, we've made some suggestions as to what that probably should look like. And it's things like, first of all, the government backing the police, not being so squeamish. We've often seen before that Labour government ministers can be actually a bit squeamish, and Labour figures can be squeamish about when they're talking about backing the police and being tough on crime. And we say they need to be much more on the front foot. We also think that there needs to be an increase in the number of people being sent to prison. Again, if we look at the last 15 years or so, we've actually seen per head of population less people being sent to prison than back in 2010. So we say there needs to be a complete rethink about how we approach crime in this country.
When you were a copper, you had a big job in the police. Could you see how policing was changing?
Well, certainly when I was there, that was during the times, for example, when we were seeing reductions in police numbers. So between 2010 and about 2018, we saw the number of police officers and police staff, so that's the people who are doing analysis of intelligence, scenes of crime officers, all of those numbers of people were reducing huge numbers, and they've never really recovered, is the reality. And the problem is you've got less people who are doing policing. That means you cannot have a tougher approach to crime than the one we've got at the moment. Because you can really see that difference.
See, I was just going to say, I don't think there's probably a police officer in the country who says they don't want to be tough on crime. You get into policing to put away the baddies. So what are the barriers to stopping that happening? Because it can't be that the police officer will tap someone on the shoulder and say, well, I know you've got a knife in your pocket, but on you go.
No.
So what are the barriers?
You're right. And what we've seen over recent years, for example, is a winding back of stop and search. Yeah. So a lack of government support for stop and search. And then you look at knife crime and we see as stop and search goes down, knife crime goes up. And that's very, very clear in the data in the last few years. So that's one example. The other thing is that the systems for example, police complaints, so complaints against the police, for officers bluntly just doing their job, it's been made much easier. So the police complaints organisation have got much more powers than they used to have.
So the police are therefore frightened.
Exactly.
In case they're going to get in trouble and think, it's not worth losing my job over this scally that I've just caught with a knife in the pocket. I'm just going to let him go.
That's exactly right.
And is some of that because of cultural, racial sensitivities, David? Is that, would you argue?
Certainly when we look at the stop and search announcements that were made by previous governments, then certainly race and ethnicity was a big part of why they were changing the rules around stop and search. There's no doubt that's the case. I have to say, Beth, I think if an officer found someone with a knife, I think they'd still be getting arrested. But it's whether the officer is willing to actually go and do the stop and search in the first place, and that's the big question.
But also, the study, that one of the facts that came out of your report is shocking. In 2024, 40% of adults repeatedly caught carrying a knife did not receive an immediate prison term.
That's right. And what's really shocking about that is the law requires that unless exceptional circumstances apply, if you're caught with a knife for a second time, you should get an immediate prison term. So what's really shocking is that actually in those 40% of cases, judges and magistrates are not following, certainly, what the law is intended to do.
But does it even get to court, David?
Well, in too many cases, that's not the case. And it starts right at the beginning. Are officers willing to do stop and search, or do they think, actually, it's more than the risk? Right through to, do people get charged with these offences? Through to, does it end up getting in court, and what's the punishment in the end? It's all the way through the system. And what the public want, what's very clear from our research, is they want a tougher approach to crime.
And what did your the people that you questioned, what did they say about how much time police should spend looking at mean tweets?
So this was overwhelming as well, actually. So when we asked people what should be the biggest priorities, what should the police be focusing on, it came out as violent crime, sexual assaults, these sorts of really serious offences. The number of people that said they should be prioritising online hate crime, as it was described, it was about 7%. Very, very small compared to 60, 70% talking about violent crime.
So, and you think about that, we saw just a few weeks ago the journalist Alison Pearson revealing that she had 2 coppers turning up on her doorstep on a Sunday morning about a tweet. They didn't even tell her what the tweet was.
That's right, and that's the whole non-crime hate incident, which I know GB News has covered, and Policy Exchange wrote a big report on at the time. Real concerns, and of course what we need to make sure is that the government stick to their commitment to wind back the non-crime hate.
And your report is in contrast to the Home Office report that was commissioned by the Home Secretary after Southport, which said we want more of these non-crime hate incidents reported.
Well, certainly.
And she's disowned it, of course, but it's about the mindset in the Home Office, and you wonder if that mindset has percolated to the top of some chief constables as well.
Well, I certainly think that the message from government over recent years has been steering away from a tough-on-crime approach. And it is unsurprising if that then filters down to police chiefs and that then filters down to the cop on the street.
Because the police chief has to answer to the politician, ultimately.
Absolutely.
And this is why Reform UK is in second place to Labour in 89 constituencies. That is why, because they're the only party that... I know it's easy, you're not in government, they haven't been in government, but that is why they are gaining popularity, because they take a hard line on these issues.
Do you think anything's going to change?
Fascinating, David.
Well, one of the central messages of our report is that the Labour government needs to get tough on crime, and that is a message they don't just get from people like me and Policy Exchange. Some of their own members of Parliament are saying we've got to stop being so squeamish about this, got to be tough on crime, because otherwise reform are coming for us.
Yeah, OK.
Fascinating.
Fascinating. From the Policy Exchange think tank, there, David Spencer.